And school shootings ever since 1979 when Brenda Spencer initiated the first school shooting, right through Columbine in 1999 when Eric and Dylan entered their school with the purpose of annihilating as many people as possible and kickstarting a revolution, to now, we've failed to seek to understand the justifications in the mind of a school shooter. So we have to start out by looking at the raw emotions that we assume are in the mind and heart of the school shooter. One of which would be sadness, right? Because a happy kid wouldn't take a gun into a school. We have anger. Obviously, when you resort to murdering people, you must be angry. Hatred. So when we look at these raw emotions, then we can begin to ask why. Why does a young person feel sad, angry, hateful, resentful, alienated, excluded? Then we have to take a hard look at ourselves in the prominent and dominant institutions that infiltrate the mind, heart, and soul of a young person. And number one would be school, because that's where for 5 days a week, 10 months a year for 12 of our most critical developmental years, we spend our time. If a young person's performance in school, either academically or socially, didn't measure up, if they felt a failure at school in this institution, then they would emerge as a young adult with a negative self-concept. The key word in school shooting is school. It's very symbolic that obviously this was a place that fostered negative emotions. School is not 100% to blame for a school shooting, but it cannot be, it should not be overlooked as a factor. And ask itself the questions: what are we doing to facilitate these ill feelings towards us as an institution? What are we doing to cause a student to feel sad, angry, hateful, resentful, out of place, excluded, alienated, intimidated, a failure? What are we doing wrong? How are we failing the children? Wouldn't it be responsible of education to take a hard look at its content and format to see where it's steering children wrong, where it's facilitating ill feelings? And unfortunately, school has become this sacred cow. It is immune to criticism, that we all just inherently trust school, that we inherently trust the state with its content and format of education, and that we believe that sitting kids in rows and columns is healthy. Now, no studies or statistics demonstrate that the format and content of education is actually healthy for a child, emotionally, physically, intellectually, socially, spiritually. Whenever a government program is launched, they typically do studies to determine its need, first of all, then its effectiveness. Now, school never went through that process. It was just assumed sitting kids in front of a blackboard, historically, in rows and columns, listening to one person, was healthy. We punish people who don't excel academically or socially in school, which is a form of bullying when you force feed content and format into a young person whose nature may not be congruent or compatible with the content and format of education. If we think that access to guns is 100% responsible for the problem, then the debate is over. There's no need for a discussion to plumb the depths of adolescent psychology in a high school setting. So sure, we could get rid of all the guns, but that wouldn't eliminate the pain that pulls the trigger. What is it about our community that fosters in young people this moral indignation? They tell themselves that entering into a school and killing strangers is right and good. On some level, they know it's wrong and bad, but on another level, they're trying to send a message because the school shooter feels like they're representing a lot of disenfranchised young people. Obviously, there's a lack of self-respect because you know what you're doing is wrong, and lack of respect for others. It's not a gang shooting, it's not a holdup gone wrong, domestic violence, it's not some random act. It's an act with a purpose to send a message that I'm in pain and I'd like to take out the people who perpetrated that pain, or send a message to society that this is the level of pain that our society is facilitating. What I oftentimes see is that this was an evil act, therefore the school shooter didn't have God in his or her life. No, I don't believe the cause of a school shooting is because people don't have God in their life. In fact, people's misinterpretations of God may be part of the cause of a school shooting. Luke Woodham in Kentucky, after his school shooting, said, "I'm going to heaven now," which in his mind, he believes that what he did was he rid the world of evil. The theory that a school shooter just didn't have God in their life is, first of all, just a theory with no factual basis. And secondly, not an attempt to seek to understand the pain and suffering that pulled the trigger. We need to eliminate the theory that the person committed a school shooting because they didn't have God in their life. Because there's all kinds of people who don't have God in their life who don't commit school shootings. And there's all kinds of people who don't have God in their life who are great people. We need to focus more on the pain and suffering that pulls the trigger of a school shooting. A young person who's well loved, who feels stable, who's not confused, who feels good, who feels successful, who feels accepted, would not entertain the idea of entering into a school and killing people. That should be our focus. That's within our power, to create institutions for young people in which they feel like they belong, in which they feel like they're making a difference, which school doesn't do, in which they feel purpose, in which they're able to connect to peers in constructive ways, in which they sit in circles and listen to each other. Of course, life, especially adult life, is full of pitfalls and criticism and rejection and failure and sadness and depression and loss. We don't need this institution called school to exacerbate what life already facilitates. We don't need this institution called religion to make us feel inadequate, shameful, guilty, or sinful. We don't need the institutions of church and school to make us feel small, to make us feel failures, to make us feel less than. We don't need another institution to tell us we're not enough. We already have the media that does that. We already have social media. We already have Hollywood. We have government. All these power institutions, all these power structures have already reminded us of how little power we have. They've reminded us of how our voice doesn't count. They've reminded us it's not a true democracy in which we're equal. So now we don't need another power structure that's antiquated like school, that's top down, and relegates everyone to this sheep-like lockstep experience. We don't need the institution to facilitate more feelings of inadequacy and insecurity and inferiority. We need institutions that reinforce who we are and how we can make a difference in the world. We need institutions that facilitate self-belief and free thinking and self-expression versus belief in blind obedience to dogma or authority figures or ideas of success or values that are imposed. But at the moment, church and school impose a lot of value systems, impose a lot of objectives, impose a lot of priorities. When we have dominant institutions that try to shape and control, human beings have this dissonance. When a child who doesn't choose his or her anger, depression, hatred, or vengeance, who is just an imprint or a reprint or a print of society, goes into a school and annihilates people, that symbolizes the greater society. Human beings cannot justify an act such as murder in any way, shape, or form, but society should be mature enough to take a hard look at its role that it plays in the feelings in which young people justify a school shooting.